What is the spiritual space required for an authentic love of neighbor? Christian Bekolay and myself reflect on this question in this week's episode of A Little Wayward Podcast. Hi, welcome to A Little Wayward Podcast coming out of St. Therese Institute of Faith and Mission. My name is Nick.
I'm Christian.
Oh, hi Christian. How are you doing today?
Very well.
Good. Yeah. You've been on the show before, right, Christian?
Yeah, a couple times. We talked about board games and a book.
That's right. Yeah, I remember those discussions. So For those tuning in today, we're going to be continuing in what we started a few weeks ago. We interviewed Rebecca Scubin about her ISP process. And so I thought it would be good to bring Christian on the show to talk about his ISP process that he did in his second year. For those of you who are tuning in with us for the first time, the ISP process is an independent study project that the second years do and complete at the end of their second year. It's a giant study project, about 20 pages long, and it's on a topic that they want to explore and apply into their spiritual lives in some way. So what did you do your ISP on last year, Christian?
I did my ISP on detachment. That was the basic premise, was detachment. Kind of the tagline that I put on that was detachment as a path for inner freedom to enter into communion with somebody else. Ultimately with God. So detachment as a path of inner freedom for communion.
Gotcha. And if you mind me asking, what kind of made you consider that topic?
Yeah, it's interesting. The whole process for writing an ISP, an independent study project, begins with discerning and deciding what you want to actually research and do. There was a few different things I was thinking about doing. I was thinking about one particular topic that really interested me was on the topic of liturgy and ritual, specifically in regular everyday life. So I was thinking about writing about the liturgy of the kitchen and just like how the family gathers around the meal and how that's related to ritual and religion in some way. So there's a few things that really excited me. This particular topic of detachment came pretty late. And I think it just came out of the interior state I was in at the time when I was discerning what to write about. It came from personal experience and ultimately it came from what I felt the Holy Spirit was pressing in my heart as something very personal to research and get into. So it was very much an interior journey. So for me, I think it came just from experience of like considering relationships that I have of any type, you know, with family, with friends, anything, how my clinging to them as like I need you was blocking me from entering into real communion with that person or those people in general, and even extended a little bit towards God as well. And from there, I kind of went broad and just like, it was like, okay, detachment everywhere, and then brought it back into communion with people. And you kind of see that in the ISP that I wrote as well. It kind of, I approach it from a broad perspective, and then I focus in on communion of persons.
I see. So when you actually, when you were speaking, I couldn't help but think of your title, because the title you have here is The Empty Embrace. Yeah. Which is a fairly relational term. Yeah. The path of inner freedom for communion. So I can kind of see that personal pursuit really influenced the first thing someone sees when they actually open up your ISP.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was, I debated the title for a long time, and I tried to think of so many different things. I have this problem. I think it's a problem. I don't know. Maybe it's an opportunity.
Maybe.
Whenever I go to name something, I always have to make it clever, or I have to make it at least deep, you know, in some way. And so I came up with The Empty Embrace, and I was like, oh, is that good enough? I don't know, maybe I should make it clever. And I thought about 15 other puns that I can make in relation. And I was like, maybe that's a little too lighthearted for what I'm actually talking about. So I kept it The Empty Embrace, which is, the embrace is like that relational thing of like, it's kind of a paradox, which is what I feel detachment is in a lot of ways. There's a paradox that comes with it. So it's embracing emptiness. So it's like this: you're clinging on to nothing. You know, you're clinging on to your nothingness. But clinging is not a good word for that. You're embracing, which is why I chose embrace. It's loving your emptiness. Yeah, so that's kind of why I kept it. I thought it was kind of thought-provoking and gives you an idea of maybe what I was going through when I was studying it. You know, this idea of like, okay, we're embracing something we're embracing this idea of letting go.
Yeah, it's fairly paradoxical. Embracing, letting go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm even thinking about it literally.
Yeah.
It's interesting you note that because the whole topic of your ISP is kind of detachment so as for communion. And it's funny you struggled over the title because it's like I was clinging to a sense of being punny or something like that. So that's interesting. I didn't know that before.
Yeah.
But in regards to your ISP, if you were to meet someone on the street and they were asking you, oh, what is this independent study project you did? How would you kind of describe the overall flow of your ISP to them? You know, and say a succinct little paragraph.
Sure, yeah. Well, this is, I was looking at my ISP before and I just made my own outline, which is part of the process of creating the ISP as well. I have three movements in my research paper, three main sections that I talk about, and each of those sections has a few specific points. The first section, I talk about, just refer to my notes here, the basis of detachment. So basically just like looking at what detachment is in general, and an idea of it, and within that I talk about attachments and what attachments are, and how they affect us. I talk about poverty of spirit, which I think ties in very much to this idea of detachment and what poverty of spirit and what it means to be poor in spirit. And then I talk about having indifference, and that was a rather big part of my ISP as well. And we'll probably get into that later, what indifference is. So that's kind of the first section, is what is the basis of detachment in general. The second section that I worked on was the movement of detachment and how we actually begin to achieve detachment. And there was three main points that I had in that section as well. The first one being to be detached, we're also working towards attaching ourselves to God and to God's will for our lives. And so it's not just this thing of letting go, but it's also a thing of like a movement towards something and towards God. I talk about just some practical aspects of detachment, what we can do to work towards detachment and very tangible things. And I think that's something that I just always really like whenever somebody's trying to explain something to me. It's like, okay, well, how do I do that, you know? And so I kind of get into that a little bit. And then the third aspect of that middle section, I talk about having a motivation for that detachment in the first place. Why do we do this? And a very real aspect of that is that it's hard. And so I really get into that. There's a cross involved with this process of detachment. And the motivation is love. And that's the only reason we would take up a cross, is out of love. And so it kind of gets heavy in that middle section, and then I'm like, but wait,
there's more.
There's a reason why we do this in the first place, and the reason is for freedom, and that's the whole third section of my ISP is freedom, and I talk about different aspects of freedom: freedom for joy, freedom from tensions and conflict, and a freedom to enter into communion with somebody else. So and that's kind of the movement.
That's that was pretty good.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. It's interesting that you mentioned the last section being freedom, because when we hear the word detachment, we don't always think freedom, or at least we don't feel that association. Yeah. Because as soon as we say we have to be detached from something, we often think of something directly in our lives that it's like, no, I don't want to let go of that. Kind of like Golem's "my precious," that kind of thing. So I'm interested to see where you're gonna take us on that one. Okay, so let's talk about the basis of detachment, which I guess you've already alluded to is clarifying almost its opposite of what is attachment. So what would you say is attachment and its general characteristics?
I heard a speaker once give an example that really stuck with me, and that was actually kind of the springboard for reflecting on this. They were talking about our spiritual life and how often we approach God as an orphan, and an orphan in the sense of somebody that has been abandoned and they have to take care of themselves. We approach God in this orphan mentality of grasping. It's like I take, because I need. And I think that's kind of my understanding of what an attachment is. It's me trying to be self-reliant. It's me trying to fulfill things for myself. This is what I need. I know I need this. I'm going to take it for myself. I'm going to hold on to it, because if I don't and I lose it, then I'm not going to be provided for. I mean, you could think of attachments as any sort of thing, like our addictions, our vices. We can be attached to our sins. We can be attached, whatever, to even physical possession of things, attached to our possessions. Ultimately, this idea of attachment is self-sufficiency, and I think that's kind of what I lay out in that first section. And so it's important to understand that in order that we can begin to let go of these things, is to understand that we're holding on in the first place. I use one example in my paper here of, we tend to hold on to things with a white-knuckled will, but the process of detachment is beginning with just letting go.
Okay, and I think you're right to identify attachment as kind of stemming from this self-reliance, this self-sufficiency. Of course, someone might actually raise the point of what's wrong with being self-sufficient, and I think that your ISP kind of steps forward into answering that. But why, I guess the question that comes here is one regarding poverty of spirit that you'll talk about. Why is it important for that first step of letting go? Is it correlating with some deeper truth about ourselves?
Yeah, well, I think going into poverty of spirit kind of answers that. And this is kind of why I move directly from attachments into poverty of spirit, and just an understanding what poverty of spirit is. When I was writing this paper and doing the research, poverty of spirit was something that was coming up a lot in the spiritual readings that I was going through at the time, and it just came up a lot in prayer. Basically, really simply put, poverty of spirit is recognizing who we are in the face of God. It's been described as the double abyss, and that was a huge theme. You might remember that from my first year. I talked a lot about the double abyss and reflected on that a lot. The double abyss basically being the abyss of God, which is everything, who is everything, who is love in its fullest sense. And then the abyss of me, which is nothing, and there's a chasm that spans between the two. Poverty of spirit, in my heart and in my understanding, is to be okay with that.
Just to recognize that this is a fact.
To recognize that I am little before God. I am, like everything I have is purely gift, even my own life. And I think, I talk a little bit about poverty of spirit, of just like how it's not actually that difficult of a concept to grasp and a concept to live out, because it's natural for us to be poor. That is our state in life, is that we are poor before God, who gives us everything. So I would say, like, moving from attachments into poverty of spirit is simply just recognizing that, I am nothing, I have nothing, and everything that I have, I can possess it, and I could attempt to possess it, but those things that I'm possessing, they've been given to me, Like, even if I'm feeling like I'm taking it for myself on a deeper spiritual level, even those things are gifts. And so entering into poverty of spirit is basically moving from the orphan into the child. And so instead of being this orphan that grasps from God, I become a child that trusts in the Father that can give me these things, which is a receptive mode before God, a mode of openness.
Yeah, that's good. In fact, what you're saying kind of reminds me of there was a researcher named Christian Smith who works out of Notre Dame in Indiana. It's not Notre Dame, it's Notre Dame,
Notre Dame.
by the Indiana standards. He was a sociologist who actually did a famous pew study, kind of studying the presence in the pews of young people in America and stuff. But he also did a study on personality. And he talked about how we have a tendency in our modern our modern myth, if you will, that man has to be completely self-sufficient, that this is his first status, and that's what he needs for his self-activation, if you will. But he actually noted that this is that's actually dependence. That is the first stance of a person. For example, a baby comes forth into the world naked, alone, and thus it is dependent upon parents for its upbringing, its survival, and such. So dependence is actually almost the first fact of human existence. And so what you would be suggesting here is that attachment is an attempt to secure for oneself, independent of dependence, if I could put it that way. So I guess that brings us to the next question of, you begin talking about how from poverty of spirit, we have to embrace a certain kind of indifference with regards to the goods of this earth. So would you mind saying a few words on that?
I would not mind saying a few words on that. This is the section that I think maybe it's not expressed the most in my actual writing, but I think it went the deepest into my own heart. Talking about indifference. That could seem like a very negative thing upon first glance. This idea of like, okay, in order to be a child before God, we have to be open and receptive, which requires this level of indifference, of not caring, but in a very specific way about not caring.
Interesting.
It could seem like a negative thing, but it's really not. And the distinction I make with indifference is it's not to not care, but it's to care very deeply, but about the right thing. It's to care and to act. Basically, the indifference that I pinpoint is having an indifference to the results of what we do and what we love. And it has a lot to do with Gaudium et Spes 24, the sincere disinterested gift of self. That very much influenced this part as well. As well, the book we discussed in an earlier podcast, The Love That Keeps Us Sane.
That's right.
It talks about indifference in there. So that was a huge resource I used in researching this. Basically, it's to say, we need to let go and we need to not care about the results of what we do and the results of who we are, but we still care very deeply about what we do, and we still work to our best ability, in serving and loving God and in knowing God, and others too, But yeah, indifference, being indifferent means that we care for no thing, I guess you could say. It's not that we care about nothing, it's that we care not if we have it or don't have it, in a lot of ways. That's being poor, and in a lot of ways that's being open and receptive. But it's not this passive thing, it's kind of a weird active passivity, where it's not that we're sitting around doing nothing, and just waiting for God to give us gifts. Like I think of the, what is it? Is it the Dominicans that say, maybe it's not Dominican, it might have been Augustine. You can correct me. Pray as if everything depended on God, work as if everything depended on you.
Yeah, that would be St. Ignatius of Loyola.
Oh, it's Ignatius. Okay. Struck out twice.
They're all Catholic, so they all have a similar sentiment here and there.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Man, I should have known that. I'm studying Ignatius right now. That's fine. I'm detached.
It's all good. It's okay. Poverty of spirit. Yeah.
Poverty of spirit. I'm nothing. Yeah, so I think that's kind of some of the notions of indifference that I get into. The thing that really came from that for me was that, okay, I have this responsibility to care very deeply about what I do, and to care very deeply about how I act, which is a very responsible thing. But it's to let go of the results of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something really good there. And in fact, I wonder if an analogy might help as well. I'm thinking something that's popping into my mind is, for example, parents. Parents are called to care deeply about their children. And they're called to be present. They're supposed to be there and helping out, especially if, say, I have a toddler, she falls to the ground and she's crying, she's incapable of lifting herself up. I show up, I'm present, I care deeply. But then if I get over fixated on results, then I could become a helicopter parent. I could become authoritarian. I could suddenly interject myself into every aspect of their lives, not recognizing that they have a free will, especially as they grow older and such. And that in the process of, as your child grows older, you actually have to let go more and more and more and care about being present and available, but to not be overly attached or care too much to results. As in, you give the teaching to your child, you let the free will take over, so there, I'd say maybe another way of phrasing it is we're indifferent as to the results. We don't put our salvation or self-worth in it, but we do care for results in as much as we should, that in the end it comes down to, have I done all that I responsibly and in due charity can? And if that answer is yes, then you let go and let God take care of the rest. Would that be kind of a good way of thinking of it?
Yeah, even as you're talking about it, I'm just kind of framing it more in my mind of understanding where I was approaching this from, because I feel like I'm kind of moving away from worldly possession and attachment in that way, and I'm starting to move towards attachment of relationship. And so when I'm talking about this and what you're saying, ultimately, again, it goes back to the disinterested gift of self. It's to love without expecting to be loved in return. Because if we are loving simply for the sake of I'm going to get something out of this relationship, that's an attachment, and that's grasping at something and holding on to it out of a self-sufficiency and out of a need. Catherine Doherty of Madonna House has a mandate, and one of the lines in her mandate is love, 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 never counting the cost. And that was something I reflected on deeply last year. So that influences this whole thought as well. It's to love without expecting love in return is basically what to be indifferent is in this case of what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, it's not like a transaction at a bank where it's like strings are attached with everything that they give you. It's like, yes, but you have to pay this off, It's not as if when we approach somebody, we invest and we're like, now I expect A, B, and C in return. We have relationships like that, for example, in the business world and such, and that's very appropriate there, But charity isn't transactional. It gives and it doesn't expect in return, although it certainly hopes for reception of the other into the good, if you will. Okay, so that's probably enough about the basis of detachment and stuff. I guess the question, of course, now is how to get there. How do we move deeper into detachment, which is your second section. At the beginning of this section, you talk about the who, the how, and the why. Of this movement of detachment. Maybe you could say a few words on those. Yeah,
I thought that was a good way to start this section, to give you something tangible, of just a way of remembering, I suppose, even what this movement of detachment is. So the who of detachment refers to kind of, in a sense, the end goal that we're working towards. We're letting go so that we can enter into a relationship with somebody, namely God. So that would be what the who is about. The how is just the practical applications. And then the why is, why would we want to embark on this in the first place? the motivation for that. I don't get too much into the who in the paper itself, except just to state very simply that in the process of detachment and this indifference, and we're working towards attaching ourselves to God, in that dependence that we were talking about before, as being a receptive child before Him. And that has a lot to do with being attached to God's will. This wasn't something I was expecting to write about, but in my research, whenever I was researching on this topic of detachment and indifference and all these different things, very specifically the words God's will came up in almost everything that I was reading, and I wasn't expecting that at all. And so there's this clear movement of as we let go of our will, we can't just like leave it in this void, but we're moving towards God's will. And it's very Ignatian, I suppose, in its principles, and you can hear that a lot in Ignatian discernment when you work through that. It's a lot about letting go so I can let God. So that's kind of the first part that I talk about there. This movement of detachment begins with this process of letting go of my will and accepting God's will for my life. From there, I move into just some practical aspects of material detachment. And I mean, we're body-soul unity, and so anything in our lives that is physical, I think, has a lot, influences our spiritual life in a lot of ways too. So there's this practical aspect of detachment from the worldly possessions. I don't quite just leave it there though. In my research, there's kind of some spiritual elements to that too, and like relational things. There's three main points of like active detachment that I talk about. And this section kind of it kind of almost moves to the self-sufficiency side, where it sounds like, oh, aren't you talking about self-sufficiency? Isn't this like what you can do to detach? And there's an aspect of yes, but no at the same time, and it goes back to, okay, pray as if everything depended on God, work as if everything depended on you. There's also an aspect of aestheticism. It sounds like it borders on aestheticism, where it's this, repression of like a stoic mindset of like, okay, we have all these things, let's repress, and like put away the world because it's bad. That's not what I'm trying to say in this section either, and there's a couple things that I affirm where it's to say, the things of this world are good, and the only reason that we're letting go of attachments is so that we can enjoy them properly, because the things of this world were made for our pleasure, and that's what God wants us, that's how He wants us to engage in this world. So the three things I talk about, the three activities, I guess you could say, of detachment. The first one, I think I have to just review this just so I don't get it wrong. Yes, okay. So the first one is in choosing the more difficult option. So if you're presented with two choices, the comfortable option is kind of is not going to be as helpful towards us as the difficult option. So choosing the more difficult option. And that could be something as simple as there's two chores presented before you. For me, it's sweeping and dishes. I would much rather do dishes than sweep. And maybe that's because I'm just standing in the same spot and I don't have to move around and push chairs around or whatever. Also, maybe it's because I struggle a little bit with perfection and I feel this sense of guilt if I don't move the chair out of the way. And so I have to like actually get into sweeping. Anyways, so one of the practical ways that we can move towards this self-mastery, I guess, and this dispossession of self is in choosing the difficult option. And it's just a simple way that we can work towards that. The second way is to limit our sensual pleasure, and that's very simply, that's what fasting is, and there's so many people, or there's so many ways we can engage in that, and there's so many spiritual writings on that, and I think as a Catholic, I've heard about that my whole life, but just basically pointing out and recognizing it's a good principle. That's a good way of self-mastery is to limit your sensual pleasure. So like I said in here, instead of eating 2 donuts, I just eat 1, and that's just a fun way of saying, it's not to say that these things are bad, but we limit them to recognize that they're a gift, And the third way is to engage in a conscious opposition to your preference. And that's hard to do, but basically to say, it kind of relates to the first point I was making, but that's basically a very simple way of self-mastery as well, to say, like, for example, I give the example in the paper of there's a person that I would rather sit beside and a person that I would rather not sit beside. Sometimes making the decision to sit beside the person I would rather not is a way of letting go of my attachments and my attractions. And that's just, another practical way that we can engage in that self-mastery.
And I think a point that could be said at this point as well is someone might be thinking at this point, it's like, but why would I necessarily give up these good things? It's fine to sit with someone where, I like talking to this person. And I think something that needs to be underlined is that it is good to talk to someone that you like. There's nothing wrong with the liking of it. And detachment is not about destroying our likes, or even detachment is not about eliminating our pleasures. It's about eliminating our clinging, if you will. The thing is that you used the word asceticism at one point. There is a healthy asceticism, kind of like a healthy athleticism. For example, is it a problem to enjoy a beer as an athlete? It's like, well, no, it's not necessarily a problem. But if it's right before game day, you give up the good of a beer so as to not feel bloated for the race. So it's actually not. It's not denying the goodness of the beer. It's precisely the particular goodnesses of that beer that are not good for you at this particular moment. Or they're not allowing you to reach the perfection of being an athlete. So this is not about between good and evil. It's between good and a better good in this situation. Which is maybe a positive way of putting it.
It's a good clarification.
And we do this in so many other areas of our lives. We get a little prickly about this when it comes to the spiritual life. And I think that could be examined in one way or another. So that's those are some very good aspects of an active detachment, this cooperation with God in purifying our minds and our hearts. The cooperation needs to be stressed, of course. But then you get into a section on motivation, and you answer rather surprisingly. You say the motivation is the cross. And that at first doesn't seem all that intuitive. So would you mind explaining that a bit?
Rereading this, I think out of all of my research paper, that'd be the part I would edit the most because I think it is the most confusing. I don't think it's wrong.
I don't think so either. It's just surprising in some
surprising,
ways.
It's like the reason why you want to do this is because it's going to hurt. That's not what I'm trying to say. But it is a point that I wanted to make in the motivation, is that I think St. Therese of Avila says it's hard to let go of ourselves because we love ourselves dearly.
She's got a particular way of getting to the core of it, doesn't she?
The cross is painful, and any time that we're engaging in this, in this act of detachment, really it is an embracement of the cross, which is painful and can be excruciating at times. Christopher West would call it an ache, but we're called to dwell in that ache. So basically, in that whole section, the main point that I want to make is that it is a cross. It is something that is painful, and it will hurt, and it is an ache, because it's a purification. You could think of a fire, it's likened to a fire, things that are purified in a fire are burned off, it's the slough is burned off. And that's kind of what's happening in this spiritual process. The slough of our lives is being burned off, and that hurts. And I think it's important to recognize that moving in. So why in the heck would I do it then if it hurts so much? Because love is stronger, love is greater, and that's kind of the tail end of that whole section, and that's the main motivation. That's what I say. The motivation is the cross, and by that, the only reason we would ever pick up the cross is because we love. Love is the strongest force in the universe, I think, and it's the only thing powerful enough that would allow us to engage on this journey of detachment, allow us to engage in this painful process so that we can enter more freely into a communion with somebody else. So that's basically what this section is about. It's about love and just recognizing that that's why we embark on this journey.
Yeah, and I think the big clarifying point that came at the end of it was you grounded it in the resurrection.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, that's right.
Because, cross is that deeper expression of love.
Yeah.
But that love doesn't just terminate in death, which is what everyone's paying attention to when they think of the cross.
Yeah,
it's like, that was an agonizing death. Why on earth would that be motivating? Yeah. It's precisely what's on the other side.
Yeah.
As in, the path of the cross is to the resurrection.
Yeah.
So the great Paschal mystery, the life, death, and resurrection of Christ, you have to view the cross in light of that final thing. If you don't, it becomes almost this cosmic sadism, if you're not careful. But that's something you brought out near the end.
Yeah,
and,
that's right.
And the words you actually used is that it brings us this pain, and this crucifixion leads to a joyousness and a flaming love. And I thought that was really that was a really good way of putting it, because Christ came that we might have life and have it abundantly. And the resurrection is precisely testifying to that. Which, of course, there's a natural segue from that motivation of the cross leading to the resurrection to your last section, which is freedom of detachment.
Freedom.
And there's a lot of freedom apparently that comes from this, right? You talk about a freedom for joy, a freedom of expectations, a freedom from tensions, a freedom to choose, and a freedom for communion. Just all sorts of freedoms.
Yeah.
So, maybe kind of just focusing on that word freedom for a moment, and maybe particular consideration of these other things might be good. In what way does this detachment lead us to be free?
Saint Therese of Avila said that he who is not possessed by anything possesses all. Something along those lines. I think I'm paraphrasing. Basically, this idea of freedom is this idea that we can actually engage in the gifts that God wants to give us in a free way, which is to be open and receptive, and we can actually truly enjoy them without needing them, and that goes for people in particular, relationship. We can actually love without needing, the other person. That's a very simple way of putting it.
Yeah, no, and I think it works. An analogy kind of presents itself in my mind. When I was kind of looking over this section, I was just thinking, because I was eating lunch over actually rereading this section, and as I was contemplating your paper and contemplating my food, this arose. For example, say there's a feast that's coming. And like, say I'm going to a wedding or something like that, and wedding feasts are always great. There's a lot of good food there. But if I go and fill up my stomach with a bunch of snack foods and stuff like that before even getting to the wedding, I'm not going to be free to enjoy the banquet. Because I'm already full. I'm already, maybe my stomach's even slightly upset. I'm not particularly in a space that I can really enjoy the stuff that's going to be present, as much as it would be good. Whereas if I just say no or renounce in some ways these simple snacks and stuff like that, and get rid of that bag of Doritos, get rid of that bag of Cheetos or whatever it was.
Pringles in your case.
Pringles in my case. I have a love affair with Pringles. I'm actually more free because of that emptiness to actually enjoy the banquet. There's no burden in my stomach, literally, as you will. So too with relationships. If there's no burdens of experience. For example, say a man's going to get married to a woman. If he had a really, really like a promiscuous lifestyle or something like that, he's going to be bringing each of those memories in with him, into that, and that's something that he has to step into purification over.
Yeah.
But he's a little less free to really enter into this particular one, this particular relationship. So it strikes me that detachment's kind of like that. You make space so as to actually really appreciate the things of this world and to have an uncluttered view, if you will, of the divine.
In a lot of ways, I think it connects with this sense of what might be described as mysticism. I can't remember who said it, but somebody said only the mystic can truly enjoy a beer.
I think that was Christopher West, actually.
Oh, okay, it was probably him. Yeah. So there's this idea of transcendence. It's to raise the gaze and to look at what these things are pointing to. Because they are good things in my life, and even relationship. It's to raise the gaze and say, this thing on earth is not going to satisfy me. Why would I bother clinging to it? In this case. But it's an icon that points me towards heaven, towards ultimate fulfillment and ultimate satisfaction in God. So I think, it could be described as like a freedom to be a mystic, you could say. I don't really get into that in my paper, but that was something that was influencing my thought, was this idea of mysticism, this idea of having a freedom to enjoy the things of this world, to enjoy the things of life. I also talk a little bit about freedom from tensions and conflict too. As you were talking about your analogy, a very practical experience came to my mind, which I think I shared with you in my first year as a student here. In the dining hall, we have 2 different kinds of plates. And I was very drawn towards a particular style of plate. And every time I would go to a meal, I would take this plate and then I would get my food on it. And then I began to recognize that if that plate ran out and I was forced to use the other plate, I would feel this sense of disappointment and frustration and be like, oh, dang it, somebody took the plates I wanted, And then it was like such a simple thing, but I recognized it in my heart. I was like, wow, I do not feel free in this area.
It was actually causing more problems.
It was causing more problems than, that was my Lenten sacrifice, was that I used the plate that I didn't like as much the entire Lent. And that turned out to be like a super fruitful exercise that spilled over into so many other aspects of my life in doing that one small thing. And to this day, if I go to the dining room and I take the plate that I want, I take it in freedom because I'm like, oh, this is available. How happy I am, I can use the plate I want. And if it's not there, it's like, oh, okay, like I don't mind using this other plate now. I'm free to use it or to not use it, the plate that I want. And I apply that to so many other aspects of my spiritual life as well, this freedom. That was just the analogy that was coming to my mind of like a very practical aspect of freedom from tension and conflict that happens in our lives, and that can spill over into relationships as well.
Well, the last 2 sections in that, this final section, freedom to choose and freedom of communion are the ones that are sticking out to me, because if you're not attached to something, you actually have a totally free choice with it.
Yeah, exactly.
For example, the addict. Is the addict really free if he's got an attachment to alcohol or something like that?
Yeah.
Is he really truly freely enjoying it, or is it actually something there's an urgency, there's a possessiveness, there's this pressure, it's always in the back of his mind. And so he's not really making his choices from an actual full choice, a full act of the will. It's actually, he just has to do it.
Yeah.
There's that question. So detachment in that regard would certainly be identifiable. And freedom for communion. Communion being like this communis, this coming together of persons. The word you've been using so far is, need. If you're projecting needs onto someone else, things that you perceive that you need for your sense of identity or something like that.
Yeah.
this can get really tense, can't it?
Yeah, oh, it definitely can. I mean, even just that word tense, I spoke about that a little bit earlier in the research paper as well. Because we can approach relationships with this idea of need and clinging, and I get my sense of identity in how you treat me, and like I feel this need to be seen and loved. And those are some basic human needs that we have, but it's how we choose to satisfy them. And oftentimes we're choosing to satisfy them in something that won't satisfy them. And at best, what it does is it numbs the ache. But that's never going to be good enough, And I think the more we think about this and pray about it and realize it, that becomes a deeper and deeper reality and truth in our lives. There's so much freedom in being able to look at somebody and say, like, you'll never satisfy me, So I don't need to hold on to you. And I can love you in that, and you can love me in that, and I can truly love you, and have that like deep sense of affection and attraction. We're not to be afraid of our attractions. We're not to be afraid of our desires. It's just, where do we point them, And so, being able to raise the gaze, and again, this goes back to mysticism, that freedom for communion is, we have this ability to actually enter into authentic, true friendship with one another, and deep friendship, and this authentic relationship, because it's not based out of a need for the other person. It's not I take for me, it's I give for us, I guess you could say, or you remind me of God, I guess, or in some ways you are. I say this very carefully. You are God to me. You're an icon of God to me. I see God in you, and I know that my fulfillment is in God.
Maybe a way of thinking of it is, when we're attached to somebody, we basically are saying, "You completely fill my need. I need you completely." And on one level, there might be something emotionally satisfying, like in that statement, which is, "Oh, somebody needs me," But if you are suddenly another person's God, or they're trying to reach total satisfaction in this relationship, this is a huge burden. I think all of us has had the experience of a clingy friend. Where they're like, if you go away and hang out with anybody else, it's like, no, you're supposed to satisfy me. You're supposed to be my friend. You can't be friends with anybody else. That's the kind of thing attachment does. It begins to be an inordinately exclusive love, Whereas maybe a healthy way of putting it is like, yes, I have a need for fellowship in my life. I'm a human being. And you are someone that feeds me in that need. But I don't need you to be the only one. I gain sustenance from my Father in heaven, and I trust that He will bring me to what I need, where I need to feed. So you are free to be my friend or not be my friend. I place no obligations upon you. This is something where there's no strings attached. There's no, I need to be careful of this, that, and the other thing, this overburdening tension. So it's the strangest thing about love in that regard, where love in a way has to say, I don't need you at a certain point. Even as other moments, it actually has to recognize you are helping me. You are fulfilling a need. But not in that absolute sense. So the word you used is to recognize the other person as an icon of the Creator, but not to treat them like an idol. Because no one can really fulfill that position. It's a huge burden and causes tensions, and your expectations go wild and everything else. So I guess that kind of brings us to the end of considering your ISP. So you kind of conclude, you wrap it all up, and kind of re-illustrate that detachment kind of leads to freedom. But I'm interested, are there any kind of concluding thoughts from yourself now, kind of even walking through this conversation on your ISP and why you think it's really significant for the church today?
There's a lot of thoughts going through my head.
Yes.
And it's a continual process of deepening too. Even in preparation for talking to you today, I read through my ISP, and I was like underlining my own words. I was like, oh my gosh, I needed to hear this, and like putting notes in the margins, and I've been taking it to prayer a lot. It's an ongoing process and a deepening, and I think I talked about that in the ISP too. Not to get bent out of shape, because it is a gradual process and it does take a long time, and that's okay. That's the journey that God takes us on. And also to be careful about not comparing to other people too, because that can be really dangerous, and you can actually become attached to your comparisons. One thing I would say is that this idea and this concept and this work of detachment has been something that I've been trying to actively engage in, and I fail a lot in it. And sometimes I don't, but only by the grace of God. But one thing I've noticed is that it's brought a lot of peace to my interior life in the past couple of years, and just a real deepening of peace. Ultimately, I'm falling more in love with God through it, and it has to do with that directing that gaze and being more attached to God's will. The process of detachment is a process of freedom, and as John Paul II would say, freedom is for love, and that's what I'm discovering. This whole process is just a process of learning how to love better, I talk about poverty of spirit, but the other beatitude that is underlying this whole ISP is purity of heart. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. And I don't ever explicitly say that, but that would kind of be a way of enveloping everything that I talk about. It's about working towards purity of heart, so that we can see God, so that we can be with God, and that we can love Him more. And it's kind of to this extent that we're able to let go, that we're able to receive. It's not this. We're not just engaging in this Karthik practice of like emptying everything for the sake of being emptied. No, it's for the sake of being filled. And actually, thinking about that now too, there's a quote that kind of summarizes everything that I've been talking about. And I think this too comes from Therese of Avila. I'm pretty sure it does. I'm sure it does. That's what footnotes are for.
Yeah.
So this is the quote. When the beloved sees his beloved empty of all else, he cannot long stay away. So much does God love us that when he finds us open and ready, he cannot refrain from filling us to the extent that we are emptied.
That's beautiful, because God is all presence.
Yeah.
So any place he sees this positive emptiness, he can't help but fill it, as a movement of love. That's beautiful. Well, thank you very much, Christian, for joining us today on the podcast, just
welcome.
to step into your ISP and go through the interrogation. This interview. I can say for myself that while there's some things that are certainly familiar, there's a particular way you expressed it that I think shows your unique voice and your unique insight. And I want to thank you for that. And
you're welcome.
I'm sure people listening to the podcast will find that edifying as well.
Also, I just want to say too, if anybody is listening and is interested in reading this, feel free to contact St. Therese, and we can get a copy for you. It's part of the process of creating an ISP and researching. It is a very personal and interior journey, and I put a lot of heart into it. But at the same time, there's an element of being detached from it too, and letting go. So if anybody is curious and wants to look into it a little bit more, there's ways that you can do that. So just to let you know.
Yeah, no, and we can certainly make that available. All right, well, thank you once again, and thanks to everyone who tuned in for today. See you next time on A Little Wayward Podcast.
Yeah.
Please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube, and you can find Little Wayward Podcast on any major podcast platform.